Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am really honored to be here because, as I would say to the nursing doctorate students, what impresses me the most is you guys are trying to make a difference out there. So often we're just around people that are really about a profit, and hopefully you're about that too, but you're really trying to make a difference in the world. Yesterday, I was at an American health insurance plan meeting in Las Vegas, and I'm back here today, and I'm missing Clinton. Clinton was there doing a speech, so that would have been interesting. But I got to hear Amgen talk about biologics, and they were talking about it being a $22 billion industry, 15 to 25% annual growth, 20 to 30 new entities a year, and 15 to 20 new indications on existing entities coming annually for the next 10 years that they can foresee. Not just Amgen, but the entire market. And I started thinking, boy, that's phenomenal that they can actually measure that. But I started thinking about this lecture today, and we don't have any of those kind of metrics on our own personal development, our own management, our own ability to lead. I mean, who in here can say, I am 15 to 25% better than I was last year? It's tough. And we were talking a few minutes ago about how hard it is to go from a scientific or an engineering background where everything is linear, it's black and white, and then you're dealing with humans and trying to lead people. And so today what I want to do is talk a little bit about effective leadership. What I said in my class was, I can't teach people leadership. What I hopefully can do is open your eyes to some opportunities, some ways to learn more about leadership, and for you to identify things that you want to adopt in your own situation. Everything's different. It would be great if there was a manual that was definitive and it said, if you do X, Y, Z, you're going to be an effective leader. But it's, as all of you know, that it's not quite that simple. The other thing I was thinking about was, you're supposed to get up and establish credibility. And can you guys not hear me?
We're taping it.
Oh.
Taping it.
Okay.
And yeah, I can't hear.
I guess that would be taped at a law firm.
Video editing, that's fine afterwards.
Yeah, okay. I didn't even sign anything. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay,
Very
good.
much, thank you.
So I was thinking about, well, who am I to come in and talk about leadership? I can just tell you, I'm a work in progress, just like the rest of us. I did spend 9 years in the military. I have spent 17 years in business in various leadership roles. And what I'd like to do is just share some of the things that I've learned. And the other thing that occurred to me was, what do I regret? And, the big lessons learned. And boy, there's a lot of people I hired that I regret hiring. And to this day, it's still the hardest thing that Ed was talking about earlier. But I don't regret any firings I've done, not one. I regret that I didn't do it sooner. So that's interesting about leading and about conflict avoidance, and typically a lot of people that are on the technical or the engineering side, want to see everybody get along, and that's always a difficult part of leadership is, calling the balls and the strikes. So let me go ahead and get started. It would be perfect if at the end of this, everybody was better at these things. But what we're trying to do is really get more out of your personal approach to leadership. And in the big scheme of things, you're trying to get people to do things, stop doing things, or continue doing things. And you want to be able to communicate more clearly and powerfully. Ed, you talked a little bit about behaviors, and I agreed with what you said. And the interesting thing about leadership is you can't think about leadership and become a better leader. It has to be reflected in your behaviors. And the thing that's most evident is how you communicate. And half that equation is how you listen. And the other part is getting down to leading individual and organizational change, especially in growing businesses, going from 2 or 3 people to a real 10, 12, 20, 200 size person organization. So you need to be able to make more informed decisions, and really it's all about performance, long-term performance. So let me ask you, who do you admire as leaders? I mean, when somebody says leader, who do you think of?
Jean-Luc Picard.
Jean-Luc Picard. Who else? Who?
Colin Powell.
Colin Powell. Did you hear him Monday?
No.
Were you at the? He was in town Monday.
Oh,
Sandy and I and anybody else get to hear him? Phenomenal, wasn't he? Yeah.
Jack Welch.
Jack Welch. Who? Staubach. Roger Staubach. Anyone else come to mind? Any women? Hillary? There's a poll in USA Today about this yesterday. What do these leaders have in common? Why do you admire them?
Principles.
Principles? And by principles, what do you mean?
They have values and they stick to them.
Values. Stick to them, do what they say they're going to do. What else?
Self-confidence.
Self-confidence?
They can be very succinct and efficient.
Succinct and efficient. In the way they communicate?
Yes.
Okay. Good. They can articulate a vision, yeah?
If you think about Jean-Luc, there's this calmness. He can practically be facing, someone's insulting him, doing all this stuff, and he's just calm and smooth and keeps his goals in mind and pursues those goals, doesn't get flustered, he manages to bring calm to people around him and get people to line up with him.
Yeah. Yeah. And it begs the question, is it innate? Is that something that can be developed? You talked about confidence. One of the things that I learned as a private was leading a patrol. They'd send in artillery simulators. You hear this whistling and then a big boom. And the thing you were supposed to do was immediately call out a direction like 10 o'clock, 200 meters, and start running that way. And it didn't matter if you called out 3 o'clock and that was the direction in which the artillery came from. It was you made a decision and you were confident and you let your troops know that there was absolute confidence in what you were doing. And you learn to actually fake it, which is kind of scary. Any other...
Take responsibility.
Taking
Being willing to take risks and then take responsibilities for that. Those risks that you take.
take responsibility for the risks. Yeah? Yeah, good. Charisma? Yeah, charisma. Who do you think of as far as a charismatic leader? Arnold? The governor. Yeah. Anyone else?
Oprah Winfrey.
John Kennedy? Yeah. Clinton?
Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. So you and nobody named anybody. Everyone named somebody famous, but in my experience, the thing that's really beneficial is to identify those leaders around you, whether they're good or bad, is to really where you can get up close and observe them in person and start to say, these are things I admire, and how do I adopt some of these behaviors to become more effective. These are some of the things we talk about in my course, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I'm just going to give you some examples. And what I would do with the students is say, I want to present these, not because I want you to memorize these traits, but I want you to look at things that speak to you. What are things that resonate with you and how you want to become more effective? And these are basically 6 theories or philosophies. And I'll cover them real quick. The first one is a trait. And in the past it was known as the great man theory. In other words, you're born that way. And then Jim Collins out of Boulder came out with a book, Good to Great. And he looked at 1,500 companies and he found 11 companies that had great results over a 30-year period. And what he attributed that to in large part was the fact that the executives that took turns there had indomitable will and dogged persistence and self-effacing humility. Those were the 2 things that they had. Those 2 traits are what they had in common. And he actually called that level 5 leadership. And he said level 1 was management, and he went through different things, and he said this is the most effective. So a lot of people are saying, okay, that's the latest, that's what I'm going to jump on. And I would encourage you to say that's a component to consider. The other one is on the behavior side, management versus leadership. Managers do things right, leaders do the right things. It's basically that philosophy. And, you know, that always makes me think of, from the behavior side, is I think of somebody from my military days. He was a Medal of Honor winner in Vietnam, just the typical Special Forces soldier, square jaw, barrel chest. I mean, he looked like he was out of a John Wayne movie. And he could get up there and motivate the troops, and, you know, we'd be on a 25-mile road march, and, you know, he was as old as I am now then. And he'd be out with the young troops, and he'd be dragging himself, and it was all about leading by example. And I think of someone like that. The other one is on power influence. And this is, you know, how they make you feel. How many people have had bosses in the past when every time you interacted with them, you felt better? I mean, you actually got energized by working with them. You had more self-confidence. You could sit and talk to them for hours. Anybody had a boss like that? Boy, it's rare. And usually you want to hang on to those bosses a lot longer. A lot of times we have bosses that do the opposite, right? They drain us. We want to avoid them. They don't get it. They drive us nuts. The next one is situational. And this is a balance between task and relationship. And in my opinion, this is the hardest tightrope to walk in being an effective leader. Is how do I manage relationships, and how do I get the job done? And what Hersey and Blanchard came out with was a chart that basically looked at tasks and relationships. And they said, you know, it's always situational. It always depends on the maturity of the follower and what I need to have done. In some areas, I'm going to be directive. I'm not going to take time to nurture that relationship. I'm going to make sure they get the job done, kind of like a military officer on a combat mission. In some areas, I'm going to coach. I'm going to have high task, high relationship. In some areas, I'm going to delegate. So delegate means there's a lot of trust, and I don't need to really do much. You can handle it. All of us want to, anyone that I've ever interviewed, when you ask them what's the ideal manager, somebody leaves me alone. Usually that person is the one that's in your office for a half hour a day needing coddling. So there's a situational approach. And then somebody had mentioned before the charismatic, and this is unquestioning acceptance. And it really does make me think of, you know, you take Clinton for the folks that subscribe to that party, and you take Bush for those that subscribe. I mean, in many cases, there's allegiance and an unquestioning acceptance of what they discuss. Very interesting. You know, how large a role that plays in those jobs. And then we would say, well, that wouldn't have an effect on us. But it has an effect on the electorate. And then the last is transformational. And that's really where the leader is able to articulate a vision and a mission and a purpose in such a way that they gain a commitment, the followers to come along willingly. And that's probably the rarest and most difficult to achieve. And in that case, yes, sir.
Question. On that last one, does the leader develop the vision and then articulate it, or does he just communicate? I mean, who develops a vision? Is that a leadership job or not?
Well, yes. I mean, the short answer is yes, but it all depends on if it's an entrepreneurial company or you're coming in as the new CEO of Hewlett-Packard. You know, what they said when Carly Fiorina was fired, we don't want to directionally change the organization, we want to change the execution. So I don't think the CEO had carte blanche to come in and change the vision. I think but I think it's up to the leader to figure out how to paint that vision and make it come to life. And that's a hard job. And a lot of times, especially on the science side, you think, okay, I told you, you know, let's move on to the next thing. And the frustrating part as leaders is you have to creatively and repetitively do this all the time. In sales, it's commonly known that you have to make 6 calls before you make an impact on that prospect, before they even remember a little bit of what you've said. And the same goes for followers. You think they're listening, they're nodding, and they're thinking about picking out milk and eggs, 30 minutes from now. And that's tough. This one I always think about, one of the first companies I worked for was Marion Labs out of Kansas City. It was a great company. We made Oscal and Gaviscon and Cardizem and Carafate. And the company was founded by this really charismatic guy that was a cross between Mr. Howell from Gilligan's Island and Mr. Magoo. And anyone that's ever been to Kansas City has probably heard of this guy. If you listen to NPR or anything, you hear the Kauffman Foundation. It's actually from Ewing Marion Kauffman. And he had owned the Royals as well. But the company was founded on two principles, and the principles are why I left the Army to join that company. Those who produce share in the results. That's really different than the Army. And the second one was the golden rule. Treat others as you'd like to be treated. Again, very different than the Army. And I thought, boy, this is the kind of company I want to go to, where it's founded on principles and values, and where people live that. We had janitors and secretaries that became millionaires there. I missed that boat. But he was a great guy to watch, and the impact he's had is, I mean, he's been dead probably 12 years now, and his impact is still being felt in Kansas and other places. Just phenomenal. So this is the textbook that I use in my course. This is the definition that they give of leaders. And it's close to the one that I always had, and that was leadership is the ability to get people to do things they otherwise wouldn't. And I do believe that's what a leader's all about. When you think about management, it's about tasks. And you all work with people that love tasks. I did this, I did that, and that's that busy versus productive. And there's a lot of managers that are that way. And I always think of it as status quo. I mean, if you need somebody to take care of status quo, you need a manager. If you need someone to lead change and to go in uncharted waters and to be uncomfortable and to pull people along, then you need a leader. And a question was asked earlier about, can you change behavior? Was that the question that was asked about? Can you change behavior, or how do you know when somebody, if somebody? What was that question right toward the end, Ed?
There was a question on the CEO can be a fundraiser or a fund manager.
Right. Yeah. That
may not be the question.
Yeah.
Talking about knowledge, and then at the end there was behavior. Knowledge, which you can give somebody knowledge.
Knowledge you can learn, skills take some time, but behavior is pretty much there.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, has anybody in here thought about this in long enough to have their own definition, something that's worked for them?
I don't know your definition, but I'm not sure you know if you are a leader or whether someone is a leader until they've been in a position to lead. In other words, they have to have a circumstance to show leadership.
Yeah. Well, I might argue with you that no matter where you're at in an organization, you have the opportunity to lead and to have a vision for your charge, for your groups. Would you buy that?
Yeah, but I guess when we were talking about whether or not you can identify leadership or as a behavior, it's situational.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I remember a lot of times thinking about promoting people, and you'd always say, I think if we promote this guy, he's really going to step it up. And you see it sometimes, but a lot of times if you're not seeing some of those behaviors, you're really suspect. So, and again, it doesn't work like a test tube or a petri dish. It's pretty unpredictable.
What about, you were saying, getting people to do what they otherwise might not. What to me, it seems more getting people to do things that would. I mean, working with who the people are, in a sense, to enable them to get more of themselves.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I hear what you're saying, but if everybody would do that on their own, then there's no role for the leader. I mean, the leader's to get the most out of folks. And I mean, if you think about even take the Broncos. I mean, if all these guys were going to work perfectly and get to their highest potential as a team all on their own, then you wouldn't need the leader that's able to figure out how to leverage strengths and get them to go beyond to go beyond that and to basically show them what could be. And I think that's, that when we talk about power influence, that those leaders that are able to, sort of show you a picture of what you could be are the ones that are so effective. I mean, they basically say, I believe in you, and I know you can do, but you're not saying, I know you can, create the best florist shop in Denver. You're saying, you're going to contribute to this biotech organization in this way, and I know you're going to do a phenomenal job. And the hard part, I think, is really leveraging strengths and not trying to, like you said, change people. It's to identify what they're really good at and figuring out what role they can play in the organization. But a lot of times, you hire somebody and they're absolutely the perfect person for that job the day you hire them. But that doesn't mean a year from now or 6 months from now they're going to be it might not be a good fit anymore. And that's a hard part that I've seen leaders struggle with is, saying, this was a great ride, but it's time for you to move on. And there's lots of ways to do that, but people really struggle with that.
It goes back to what one of your last comments was, that it's a leader gets people to do, not to do what they've always done, right? But to step outside the box and do different things.
Right, absolutely.
So,
Well, and again, it goes to, whatever you learn from this session and whatever you decide how you're going to approach leadership and how you're going to become more effective is about, you're going to have to change. You can't just think about it. You have to change. You have to change the way you communicate, and you have to change the way that you listen. It doesn't mean you have to become charismatic or you have to become an extrovert, but some aspects of your behavior are going to have to change, because what you're trying to do is make a difference out there. And you're realizing now where you're at in your ventures, that you can't do it alone. You got to get people to come on board. And a lot of the questions in my class were always, how do I sell my vision to people that I can't pay? And that was their big dilemma. Is and you had asked, how do I recruit? How do I get these people to come on board? And part of that's, how do I sell this? And paying attention. Maybe you hate salespeople, but pay attention to somebody that's really effective at selling. Why were they so effective? I mean, I spent a fair amount of my career selling and a fair amount leading, and I really see them interchangeable. I don't see them a lot different. Even in the Army, everybody thinks the Army is you tell people to do things and they do it. It's sort of that way, but what you really want are people that are going to come along willingly. I mean, otherwise you're in combat and you'd end up like a lieutenant in Vietnam with a bullet in your back. So, what this should be titled is 6 Steps to Effective Leadership Learning, not just leadership. And that is, and this is some of you are going to get really uncomfortable because this is really soft. But part of it is, and I actually changed it from some of the things I've seen, is clarify your center. So I changed it. But really, what's your vision for your organization, for your role? Where do you see this going? What are the possibilities? To really make a difference. I mean, my own company, which is a pharmacy benefit management organization, not nearly as altruistic as what you are doing. Our mission still involves extending and prolonging human life. I mean, we want to make, improve quality and quantity of life. And that's still part of what we do. And I was talking to my IT team today, and I said, don't forget, no matter what you do, it's still about helping patients, serving people to obtain health care efficiently and economically. It's about patients and their families at the end of the day, period. So really clarifying what you're trying to achieve. And what I would encourage you to do is, and this isn't all going to come to you all at once, you've really got to expose yourself to a lot of different things. A lot of you are, I'm assuming, are very focused and you're experts in a particular field. And there might be some of you that are generalists. But what I would encourage you to do is really expand what you're reading, what you're looking at. When you're talking to that guy at Stevenson Chevrolet buying the car, pay attention to what he does right and wrong as far as how effective he is at figuring out your needs and communicating those. And then based on that, really figuring out what's possible. And part of that is looking at your own paradigms and your own priorities. And possible means there's a lot of things that are possible, but what's probable? What can I get done? what's a little bit too blue sky right now, and then figuring out what can others contribute, what skills do I need, and strengths, and a lot of that's being honest with yourself as far as, you know, where are your gaps, what do I need. I brought in a candidate the other day and for one of our middle managers, and she interviewed her, and I thought she was phenomenal. And she came back, she goes, she didn't let me get in a word edgewise. Well, I always suspected that this person wanted to hire people that were really subservient. And then I thought, that's what this is all about. She doesn't like somebody that's in there taking charge and this person took charge of the interview, which I love when people do that. This person hated it. So she's trying to hire in her own image, which is really dangerous. Then once you've got them, is support them so that they can contribute and provide the resources. And then, of course, all of you have, you know, unlimited amounts of passion, no outside interest, and you're going to drive and drive. And then establishing realistic milestones. So that's some things to think about. And for those of you that did see Colin Powell the other day, I thought what he talked about really paralleled this diagram. And he didn't say, here's my theory of leadership. He just talked about things. And if you listened real carefully, you kind of picked it up. And by the way, in my opinion, he was probably the best public speaker I've ever heard. Self-deprecating humor, relevance. He was just phenomenal, if you ever get a chance. But he talked about values being at the core. And that is what helps you establish trust. And then what you do is you outline a purpose for the organization, the mission and the vision. And then what you do is you provide the resources along the way so that people can be successful. Because at the end of the day, people are always asking 3 questions. You know, do you care about me? Are you committed to me? Can I trust you? Those are the questions we ask of each other every day, but we don't ask them out loud. And those of you that just met today, at the same time you're meeting somebody, you're wondering, is this a good guy? Can I trust him? You know, does he care? Is he only focused on his things?
To that point, I've had good luck asking my people the Gallup 12 questions. You know, just having those discussions about the Gallup 12 or using the Gallup organization to get those results independently and confidentially has been extremely helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know to what extent you.
I'm not familiar with them. What are some examples?
The Gallup organization has interviewed thousands of individuals and companies to see who was successful, and they looked for certain attributes, and what they did is they boiled it down to 12 questions that they asked the survey takers. And if they got favorable responses, it was indicative of high morale and high productivity and high profitability. And what they had, these 12 questions are effectively built in a pyramid, if you will, of almost like Maslow's hierarchy.
Right.
At the very bottom is, do you have the tools to do your job? You know, do you have the training to use the tools that you have? So it starts right there at the bottom of the pyramid, and then it works up the pyramid to does your boss care about you? Does your boss help your career development? So it gets into more of a self-actualized place, and if you can get super high scores on this whole pyramid, odds are you're going to have high morale, high productivity, and profitability.
Right. Oh, that sounds great. There's lots of tools out there that are similar. I know Towers Perrin, a really excellent HR consulting firm, probably none of us can afford, but they do a survey once a year called an engagement survey, and that's a new buzzword. Is, you know, it's a little bit beyond morale. Is how engaged are your employees, and when they're engaged, they're committed. And an indicator of that is, are they going to work, whether it's in their head or physically at the office, beyond the work hours.
And Gallup hits that on the head too.
Yeah.
And you know, I wish I could think of the best-selling book, but it's easy to. The Gallup book is there in the business section.
Okay. Oh, that's
It's a
great.
good read.
That's a great idea. So this is a model just to kind of think about, and it's always helped me, you know, figure out when I've taken over a group, you know, how do I go from where I'm at to where I need to be, and the simple way is, where are we going, how are we going to get there? And I always think, the analogy I always think of is, you know, putting your family in a car in Maine and going to California. You know, we're in Maine, we're in a car, we're going to go to California, here's the route we're going to take, it's going to be scenic, and then the other part's going to be interstate. We need this amount of gas, We need this much food. We need these toys to entertain them with. And what we want to do is make it there in 7 days and 3 hours. So we're going to get to Peoria by this day and to this place. So in a lot of ways, however you go about painting that picture, do something that's relevant for them that they can relate to. And again, that way you're gonna get them on board. And related to that picture was that mission and vision. And this is what Colin Powell talked about on Monday night, was an intense commitment to a purpose. And when we talked a few minutes ago about having the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus, this is probably the most important thing. Is you as a leader have to have this, but your folks have to have that commitment as well. And if it wanes, or if they're in key roles and that commitment's not there, I mean, they're not going to be happy. They're not happy, they're not going to perform well. And that's always a great lead-in if you think you're having a performance problem, is, are you happy here? And chances are, if they're not, then that's an opportunity for you to figure out why. Did you not paint the real job expectations when you hired them? Has the environment changed? Have they changed? Have you not given them the amount of support and resources and leadership that's required for them to be successful? Whenever anyone leaves or you have to terminate somebody, that's always an opportunity to figure out where did we fail? How did this person not succeed in this job? Were there things on our side that we can learn and get better? So a lot of times, when we think about leadership, we think about power. And the two sides on the left are the ones that most people think of as legitimate authority, and that's the title. And the other one is, unfortunately, coercion, which instills fear. I may have been in jobs where you thought, on a monthly basis, I might be fired. Anybody? Only a few? Anybody ever been in a big company that got re-engineered, downsized, right-sized? That's not a fun environment. And known to most people is the fact that, the rewards, just like animal training, is much more powerful. Of course, expertise, and I would assume all of you have expertise that provides power to your leadership. And then the other one is reference power, which is admiration and respect, which has to be earned, and that's to gain voluntary responses. Anybody have any insight on power, how it's used or abused in the form of leadership? Yeah.
I don't know if this directly relates to power, but I think it does. On here, I think that maybe you're missing, or maybe you haven't talked about, or maybe it's just assumed about consistency. Because if sometimes you're a leader and you're using title or fear, and sometimes you're using need, you're going to drive your employees crazy.
Right.
Due to personal experience, I can say that.
Well, I wouldn't say that I actually wouldn't use either of these. Is what I would say. And I agree with you about consistency. And one of the things that's really important in a leader is predictable behavior. I mean, we've all had bosses that you never know how they're going to react. I better not go in on Monday. I better not go in on Friday. I'll hit them on Wednesday afternoon. I mean, that's the worst. So you have to be predictable. But, this is an adage I was taught a long time ago, was catch people doing things right. It's really easy to catch people doing things wrong. It's really easy. It's a lot harder. And I work with a few folks that self-admitted, I don't praise my people enough. Why not? Well, I don't want to be techniquey. I don't want to, it'll come off as fake. I said, do you like it when you hear that you did a good job, even if it's, hey, good job? Well, yeah, of course. Well, that's all you got to do. And the higher up you go in organizations, the less we all get praise and feedback. And it's like, well, the people on the floor, the people in the lab, they need the most of that. The directors and the VPs, they don't need that. And that's nonsense. We all need it. And, the key thing about how people are motivated, which I've got a slide on here in a sec, what's the best way to figure out how somebody, what motivates somebody? Yeah, that's it. Ask them. How many people have ever been asked by their boss, what motivates you? Right? Probably less than half the time.
I will say that I wasn't asked by my boss. He would bring little poison pen letters and put it on my desk, and sometimes it would kill my productivity for a whole day because I was so angry. But I took in my 10 motivators to him, said, this is what motivates me. If you want me to perform, this is how to get me to perform. And it changed our whole relationship.
Yeah.
With respect to the last slide, it occurs to me that the power is not always in the leader, but in the idea.
Yeah.
And that if you can build such a beautiful idea, that people will make a commitment to the idea as well as to the person.
Yeah, yeah. That's part of what we talked about with painting the vision. Yeah.
Well, on that last slide, you also, on the power had on the right-hand side, the expertise versus title. On the left, you're talking about the leader, because that seems to be in the science is a big thing, that the leadership, that you have a bunch of people working in typical small companies where the people have the expertise, but the leader is the talker and doesn't necessarily know the science and stuff, and that you have this big chasm between.
Yeah, Gary's talking about power from expertise, and that comes from leadership. If you think about big picture presidential debates, I mean, there's a lot of credence put in somebody talking about Medicare. You know, who sounds like they know what they're talking about. So there's a power that's derived from being an expert, having an in-depth knowledge of something, not just peripheral.
But in these cases, you've got to be the greatest kind of world, and the greatest motivator, and the greatest speaker, but he doesn't understand what's actually happening in the base. Apparently, you're never really going to look to him for anything.
That's right. And think about Bill Gates, and one of the he's learned to become a fake extrovert, but he's an introvert. But you know, he's a geek. And one of the reasons he's so effective is he knew what he was talking about. And he's known for being in meetings where he'd call BS on folks and send them back to the drawing board. So he had that expertise that he derived power from. And then he had a track record, and people said, you know, you've been right more than you've been wrong. You know, I'll follow you. So this is a slide on motivation. Has anyone ever heard of Hertzberg's work on motivation? This is like classic. What always surprises folks are there's hygiene factors and there's intrinsic motivators. And if you ask people, you know, what would motivate you? More salary, bonus, all those types of things. And what Hertzberg found was these hygiene factors aren't necessarily going to motivate you, but they're going to increase you from dissatisfaction to basically neutral. And that included company policy, administration, supervision, relationship with the manager, and salary, which was down here. What motivated people, what made people go beyond was achievement, their own, what they felt about the achievement, recognition, the work itself, responsibility, advancement, and growth. Those are the things that motivated. So a lot of times when we do surveys of our organization, we'll focus on hygiene factors and say, well, if we fix all of these, then we're going to have motivated employees. What you do is you fix those and you have neutral employees. What you have to do is figure out that reward piece of things. And that's got to fit within your values and your culture and what makes sense. What might make sense for a sales organization as far as a reward and recognition, that is, get up in front of, at an awards meeting, be able to give us a 5-minute speech in front of 10,000 people. That's, for you guys and your teams, that might be the worst thing you could do. So it's trying to figure that out, and again, it gets back to asking them, you know, what would motivate you? But really paying attention to the positive sides of things. Any comments on that? Yes, sir.
In looking at those, have you done any looking at high-achieving nonprofits?
No, I haven't. Maybe, Sandy, have you looked at high-achieving nonprofits?
No, not from a motivation standpoint.
Yeah, because I see some of the nonprofits, they can't deal with a lot of those hygiene factors.
Right.
I mean, so it really becomes those intrinsic motivators, supervision, tying people to the vision. And I wonder how much more useful that might be in a small company at the early phases when money is really tight.
Yeah.
And how do they do that? Because you can address some of those other things later on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the interesting thing is they're all volunteers.
No, I'm talking about the paid staff.
I mean, quote unquote. And there's actually a guy in town. Anyone ever heard of Wheat Ridge Cyclery? It's a pretty big bike shop here. And the owner was saying that they don't call their employees or associates, they call them volunteers. because the average person there is making $12 an hour, and they stay for 10, 20 years. They call them volunteers. What they try to do is work on the top part of this. And then again, it's what they might have in common with folks at a nonprofit is, you know, they have this passion for fitness and cycling. People in a nonprofit, if it's a nature conservancy or something, they're going to have a passion for what they're doing. So, and that's again why it's so important on the business side to have people not just motivated about earning a profit, but to really buy into what you're doing. And the great thing about all of us being in healthcare, I mean, we're trying to make the world a better place in the big scheme of things. And there's lots of ways to paint that picture. I mean, you guys got so excited talking about some of the stuff you're doing. You know, I wanted to sign up. So all this boils down to influencing others. And when I taught that class with the nurses, this is the thing they had the most problem with, because they saw it as manipulation. And again, if you go back to the definition, it's to get others to follow you willingly. Willingly means everything, you know, it's transparent. It's an open book. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to paint the picture, and I'd like for your behavior to change and for you to come along willingly. So part of that is listening effectively and trying to pick up the language cues. On the follower, it's, what do you want me to do? What's the next thing? On the bureaucrat, it's, well, we've got to do X before Y. On the contrarian, it's, well, that we tried, that didn't work. That'll never work. I don't know. I was in another company. And so really paying attention to, you know, what's coming in, that active listening, that reflective listening we have all heard about, but we could all get better at. And then the other part is communicating effectively. And what you're really trying to do is, through all this listening and communication, is to gain a commitment so that people buy into these common goals. If they don't buy into the goals and the values, then that's really a bad fit, in which you talked about in the previous session. And part of this is, you know, this leadership is teaching and coaching. If you think about the leaders that have had the most effect on you, I guarantee they taught you something. And I guarantee there's probably a teacher, literally a teacher, that's had a profound influence on your life at some point. And what they probably did was, they didn't teach you about molecular biology. What they did was, they held up a mirror and helped you see yourself in a different way. They helped you see where you're at and where you could be. And that's really what great leaders are able to do. And you know, they start out with coaching one-on-one, and then they're able to influence 5 people, and then 10 people, and then 50 people. And some of the people that will be in the organizations will be very effective one-on-one, and some people are not going to be effective in large groups. And that's, again, understanding where they're at and where they want to be. And looking, in the last session you talked about building teams, and I really liked how you had those different shapes. And one of the things that I found that's really pragmatic is to think about these 4 roles as you're building a team, or even if you've got 2 people or 10 people. As you're sitting together and you say, okay, we need to solve this problem, we have this opportunity. It really helps if you know, and you have somebody that's task-oriented. Process. We need to, let's establish milestones. You know, hey, I don't want to waste time. We need an agenda. We need minutes. We need a recap. We need action steps. Then you've got somebody down here that's on the relationship side, the people side. Well, if we're sitting here for 8 hours and we don't do something fun, or take an hour for lunch, it's gonna kill us. Maybe we need to do some camaraderie. So they're that soft skill stuff. Then you got the blue sky person. You know, we're going to the moon. Then you need the person who says, yeah, and how are we going to get back? And so you need these 4 roles, and if you're cognizant, whether you've got 2 people or not, that you're able to pull these together in your leadership team, I think you're going to find that you're a lot more effective. Or identifying or saying, I mean, all right, here's 4 roles that are essential. Who's going to fulfill these roles as we go through this project, this business plan, or whatever we need to do? Has anyone ever tried that approach and found it effective? Depends on what?
Well, I take the situational leadership. I mean, all of these arrows in the quiver you can use, but and I'll take the Army example. When it's time to take the hill under an artillery barrage,
Yep.
you can't afford a whole lot of touchy-feely people. On the other hand,
there are situations where it's more appropriate to invite a sell philosophy rather than a tell philosophy.
Yeah.
So I tend to take the Blanchard approach, where a lot of these leadership situations are situational, and you have to have a big bag of tricks.
Yeah. And I can appreciate that. The one of the things to think about in your ventures is, I mean, a lot of you, you know, you're on a mission. I mean, you know, you're literally on a mission. And one of the things to keep in mind is there's been a lot of studies that have been done about individual decisions and team decisions. And you're right. I mean, there's times and you got to make a decision. But what they found, even with, and again, not to use too many military examples, but they did a lot of studies of survival training, people that were experts in survival. And when they were in survival situations and made decisions by themselves, they were far inferior to when they were put together as teams, and they figured out how to make those decisions. And there's been business examples as well. So as a leader, it's figuring out, when do I need to make a decision? When might I have a blinder on, and I need some of this balance. And that's a hard thing to do in the heat of things.
That example of would say that the involvement in numerous people is because you went with a better decision, or just because people will follow better because they were involved in the decision?
Well, the study showed that they came up with a better decision. They actually picked a better path. And I've actually been in those situations as well. I'm survival by myself, and then with teams, and with teams it was, you know, it's fun. Misery loves company. That was one thing, but we did make better decisions, and because what we did was we leveraged, you know, without even thinking of any of this stuff, we just leveraged each other's strengths.
What Arlen's saying, I think that, you know, when you have to make that call that says, this is the way we're going, to the extent you built this reservoir of goodwill and trust with people, it's easier for them to get moving with that program.
Right, absolutely.
And then you can fall back on their skills and talents as they were there to help you make the practical thing. People will come to the fore if they've been allowed to use their particular skills and talents to get over a hill, around a hill, and say, stop and let's go. You know, let's look at this other direction.
Or through it or blow it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Arlen, did you have another comment?
No, I was just going to say that the one of the models in the very first slide that you didn't include was the emotional intelligence Goldman literature, and I find that very useful in terms of there's a trilogy of books and emotional intelligence and all that, and it's a course in itself. But the bottom line is he defines 6 leadership styles, and to this point, you have to be very careful in his mind, and I agree, when you tell people what to do. That's like a last resort leadership strategy, because it's a dysfunctional leadership strategy, but sometimes it's called for.
Right.
If I'm in the operating room dealing with 16 people, I got to make the call, and I can't call a committee meeting.
Right.
On the other, and everybody understands that, but I don't do that very often. In fact, the OR is the only place where anybody listens to me. So it's you have to be very careful when you do that. The other ones are more proactive, and you tend to get more built-in support. But every once in a while, you got to say, "Hey guys, time out. Here's where we're going."
Oh, I agree. And in the course I taught, we did talk about emotional intelligence, social change intelligence, IQ, physical. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things, and that really relates to that point about learning and expanding and reading and looking at different things. So thanks for bringing that up. One of the last slides I want to leave you with is, and you're probably death by PowerPoint at this point, aren't you? Is the organizational glue. I don't think there's anyone in here that would argue with the fact that you need effective leadership for an organization to perform, and that means grow. And part of that is retaining and attracting the talent, the link between pay and performance, and formal programs to develop leaders. And that's something that's always neglected in the heat of things from a business perspective. We've got this to do, we've got that to do. People do not want to take time to coach and develop and bring people along. And especially in knowledge industries where there's a lot of expertise in a few people, that's knowledge is power. People don't want to share that, and there's a danger in not having those redundancies, and you talked about it. So again, there's the reward piece, there's the policy piece about how do you create the right amount of cooperation and competition even within your own team, and then those common values and purpose. And what I would support is really the customer satisfaction before the growth. Not that they're exclusive, but the focus being on who the customer is. And Peter Drucker, famous business guru, always said, you know, if you, as a consultant, he said, all I need to do is ask two questions. What business are you in? And who's your customer? And if you think about it, those are really hard questions to answer. I mean, really hard. We were talking about, you know, who do you go sell these ideas to? You know, and then if you figure that, well, what business are you in? I mean, what are you really selling to them? And it depends on who your customer is, as far as how you position what you're selling, what that business is all about. And those are really hard to define. So again, as you look at those, I mean, those are where you bring in the team and you figure out do you have the right talent to start to answer those things and develop them. And from that, all those other things will flow. And the last thing I'll leave you with is, and I thought of you guys because I understand you're really brilliant. But the quote is, you know, you gotta remember not everybody's like you, you know, that you're going out to hire. I mean, they are going to have outside interests. You know, they are not going to have the same level of passion. If they did, they'd be in your shoes, and they're not. So you have to keep that in mind. I mean, you all are exceptional folks that are on the verge of doing great things in our community to make a difference in healthcare and importantly and economically, you're going to be job creators. I mean, you're going to be leaders whether you want to or not. And once things start happening, you know, they're going to look to you and think you've got a lot of answers. So I really wish you the best of luck. I'm right here local in Denver and would love to hear successes, or if you want to bounce ideas or you want some contacts in pharma or anything like that, I'd be more than happy to help you. I thank you for having me today.